The Atlantic was gray that morning. The sea rolled like molten steel under a veil of fog, and the captured German soldiers huddled near the railings of the Liberty ship felt every vibration of the engines beneath their boots. The war they had sworn would last 1,000 years was over, for them, at least. Yet the future was cloaked in the same uncertainty that hung above the waters. One of them, Oberfeldwebel Karl Meissner, leaned on the cold metal railing, staring at the endless horizon. Just weeks ago, he'd commanded a machine gun team on the Western Front, fighting in the smoking ruins outside Aachen. Now, hands calloused and wrists bound, he was on his way to a country he had only known as an enemy, a country he had been told was decadent, weak, industrially inferior, America. He remembered the propaganda broadcasts. The Americans are lazy, soft, and dependent on their machines, Joseph Goebbels had said. But already Karl wondered if that voice from the radio had been lying all along. The vessel carrying them was massive, built from seamless plates of steel, faster and larger than anything he had ever seen back home. Even the food was strange: hot coffee, eggs, sausages. He tried to imagine Allied prisoners being treated this way in a German camp, and a quiet shame crept into his chest. By mid-morning, the ship's captain announced they were nearing the American coast. The prisoners crowded the deck, and when the first sight of the shoreline came into view, an audible gasp rippled through the group. Factories, docks, cranes, and rail lines stretched as far as the eye could see. Ships stood side by side, so many that Karl could hardly count them, all of them new, painted, alive with workers. One whispered, "Mein Gott, they have more ships in one harbor than we had in the whole Kriegsmarine." The guards said little. Some smoked quietly. Others glanced occasionally toward the German soldiers but kept their distance. Karl noticed that the guards were young, boys really, but their uniforms were immaculate, and their weapons gleamed with factory precision. They didn't look like men on the edge of collapse. They looked like men from a nation that had only just begun to leverage its power. When the prisoners finally disembarked, they were herded onto trains, long silver trains with polished steel and wide, cushioned seats. Karl touched the seat and muttered, "This is for prisoners?" A guard smiled faintly, replying, "Welcome to Kansas, soldier. You'll see more than you expect." As the train roared westward, the landscapes began to change. Green fields, small towns, endless farmland dotted with machinery. Everywhere there was motion, production, wealth. Even the rural stations had electrical lights blazing in the afternoon sun. The sheer abundance was overwhelming. "How can they have so much?" whispered Dieter, a 19-year-old Luftwaffe mechanic from Dresden. Karl only shook his head. When they arrived at the Fort Riley POW camp, the prisoners expected barbed wire and starvation. Instead, they found rows of neat wooden barracks, organized kitchens, and a canteen the size of a small town hall. They were marched inside for inspection. No shouts, no beatings, no humiliation. Instead, an American officer stood on a small platform and addressed them calmly. "You are soldiers. The war may be over for you, but here you will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Work will be assigned, food will be given, and respect will be maintained if you show it yourselves." The Germans exchanged glances. For some, suspicion lingered. For others, disbelief. For Karl, it was the first hint that what lay ahead might not just be captivity, but revelation. Night fell quickly over Kansas. The camp lights flickered on, humming quietly like a factory at rest. Karl lay in his bunk, staring at the wooden ceiling, listening to the strange sounds of American insects outside, so different from those at home. He thought of his wife back in Köln, of the smoldering ruins where his house once stood, and wondered how this nation, untouched by the bombs that scarred Europe, had achieved such unimaginable power. Maybe, he whispered to himself, we never really understood who we were fighting. Outside, floodlights swept across the camp perimeter as freight trains rumbled in the distance, hauling coal, trucks, and food across the heart of America. For the German prisoners, it was the beginning of an education unlike any they had ever received. That night marked the end of their old world and the beginning of a new one built on steel, efficiency, and abundance. The factories of freedom. The days passed and the Germans began to settle into a rhythm within the camp. Work assignments came quickly: field labor, carpentry, maintenance. But for Karl Meissner and several others, fate had another lesson in store. They were selected for a special detail assisting the nearby town's agricultural machinery plant. When the trucks rolled out, carrying the POWs under casual guard, Carl didn't realize he was about to witness the true scale of American industrial power. The plant loomed ahead like a sleeping giant. Brick walls stretched hundreds of meters, crowned with vast windows and roaring furnaces within. The air vibrated with the pulse of mechanical life, each sound like thunder forged into precision. Inside, hundreds of men and women worked side by side, young, old, civilian, soldier, each one a cog in a system designed to create. Rows of conveyor belts moved continuously, feeding steel parts into stamping machines that beat in rhythm like a great mechanical heart. Carl stood still, astonished. "They are building tractors like we built tanks," he murmured. His American overseer, a sturdy man named Sergeant Allen, overheard him and smiled faintly. "That's the thing, soldier. Out here, machines feed people, not destroy them." Their task was simple: stack components, clean machinery, assist with assembly. Yet the simplicity hid something profound. The Germans watched how seamlessly the operations ran, how quickly raw materials became finished products. No chaos, no shortages, no fear. Even more bewildering was the sight of women in work clothes, hands blackened with grease, operating lathes with confident precision. Dieter whispered under his breath, "In Germany, that would have been forbidden." At noon, the Americans stopped for lunch, and to their surprise, they handed food to the Germans as well: sandwiches, apples, milk bottles. Carl chewed quietly, watching the machinery in motion. A young American foreman sat nearby, smoking a cigarette. "You boys look surprised," he said, his tone half amused, half curious. Carl hesitated. "We were told America depended on imports, that it could not sustain war without stealing resources." The foreman exhaled smoke and gestured toward the building. "Son, every screw, every bolt, every drop of oil here, made right in this state. And there are 50 more factories just like it across the Midwest. We don't run out. That's the difference." That night, back in the camp, Carl wrote the words into a hidden notebook he'd made from scrap paper. "They have turned labor into creation, not command. Their strength lies not only in machines, but in spirit." Over the following weeks, the Germans were sent to other places: farms, mills, even a locomotive assembly yard. With each assignment, the myth unraveled further. They saw the same pattern everywhere: organization, abundance, a sense of purpose. No starvation, no ration queues, no bombed-out ruins. It was as if a different world existed entirely, untouched by the devastation of the continent they had left behind. One day, a group of prisoners was taken by bus past a vast rail depot near Topeka. The sight brought silence to the entire vehicle. Endless rows of freight cars, each freshly painted, each marked U.S. Army transport. Diesel locomotives thundered across the landscape, their horns echoing like victory songs. Dieter leaned forward, stunned. That locomotive alone could pull 50 tanks," he whispered. Carl's voice was quiet, analytical. "This is why we lost." The guards heard him but didn't reply. They too had grown to respect these former enemies, not for their skill, but for their honesty. Inside the camp, over time, small conversations bloomed. American soldiers asked about families, cities, languages. Germans asked about industry, education, and freedom. The more they talked, the more a strange mutual understanding began to form. One evening, as Carl and the others were repairing farm fences outside the perimeter, Sergeant Allen spoke softly behind them. "You know, Carl, you fought well, but you must have realized something by now. We didn't win because of luck. We won because we could build faster than anyone could destroy." Carl looked up. The sunset burned crimson across the plains. "You built for life," he said. "We built for conquest." The sergeant nodded, tapping ash from his cigarette. "And look where that got us all." The days turned to months. The war's echoes faded but never vanished. With time, letters arrived from Germany, tattered, stained, full of desperate words. Carl's wife wrote only one sentence that haunted him: "Our city is gone, but I am alive." That night, sitting under the Kansas stars, Carl realized the full scale of what he was witnessing. America hadn't defeated Germany just on the battlefield. It had defeated an ideology of scarcity with an engine of plenty. Every machine, every barn, every lighted town was proof that freedom could build faster than tyranny could destroy. He lay back on the grass, staring into the vast, unbombed sky. It was different somehow, peaceful, full of unseen promise. In his mind, he whispered, "All this power, and they never had to burn the world for it." But the story of revelation did not end here. Soon, the prisoners would be moved again, this time to aid in harvest work near Chicago. And there, amid the sprawling railways and colossal factories, they would witness something that would change their view of America forever: the railroad empire. The summer of 1944 in the American Midwest shimmered with heat and motion. Wheat fields rippled like golden oceans, trucks roared across dust roads, and everywhere the hum of engines filled the air. When the German prisoners were transported north toward Illinois, they thought they had already seen everything the United States could offer. But what awaited them in the heartland, stretching from Chicago's outskirts into the Steel Valleys, would erase all that remained of their beliefs. The train that carried them into Chicago was unlike any they had ever traveled in. Smooth, clean, with wide seats and cold air circulating through narrow vents. Outside, the horizon thickened with industry. Warehouses the size of villages, towers of rails, coal yards and switching yards, where locomotives crawled like great mechanical beasts through smoke and steel dust. When the train slowed, Carl pressed his face against the window. He had grown used to marvel, but this was something else. Miles of iron, endless wagons, cranes swinging containers in rhythmic arcs, hundreds of men and women in overalls, their movements perfectly choreographed. It was as if an entire city pulsed to one mechanical heartbeat. As the convoy of prisoners marched through the depot yard toward their new camp assignment, the air smelled of oil and furnace heat. Crewmen looked up briefly, nodded or waved politely, then returned to their endless work. No hatred, no scorn, just industry continuing its eternal rhythm. Sergeant Allen, still assigned as their escort, pointed toward a nearby complex. "That," he said, "is Pullman Works. They build the trains of the future there. Sleeps 100 men per car, runs coast to coast." Carl studied the building, white smokestacks, a sea of windows, and steel carriages sliding out into the sunlight. "All of this," he murmured, "built in 1 year?" "Less than that," Allen replied. "America doesn't pause, even for war." That night, the prisoners were quartered in temporary housing near the factory outskirts. Light from the city glowed orange against the clouds, even at midnight. The sound of trains never stopped. It was a lullaby made of labor. Carl couldn't sleep. He walked to the edge of the fence and stared out at the glowing horizon. Back home, he thought, we built walls of concrete. Here, they build bridges of steel. The following weeks became a lesson not in defeat, but in awakening. The POWs were assigned to unloading rail cars, grain for bakeries, steel for workshops, even mail. They worked alongside American civilians, many of whom spoke to them kindly. Some even cracked jokes about making you boys earn your supper. One foreman handed Carl a newspaper, showing photographs of tanks rolling through Normandy. "We make those," he said, pointing to the pages. "But I get paid overtime for it. That's the American dream, fella." At first, the Germans thought these men were exaggerating, but day after day, they witnessed a system that rewarded effort, not rank. Men from farms, from the city, even former coal miners, all earning, saving, laughing. To men raised in a military hierarchy, it was both alien and liberating. In late August, a group of POWs, including Carl and Dieter, were allowed to assist in transporting new locomotives to another yard. They rode inside one of the newest diesel-electric beasts. As the engine thundered to life, the vibration rolled through the floor into Carl's spine. "Diesel-electric," the American engineer shouted over the roar. "No coal fire, more efficient, cheaper, faster." The train surged forward, fields blurred into streaks of green and gold outside. The Germans held on as the miles disappeared beneath the wheels. Everything about it screamed of modernity. No smoke, no delay, no exhaustion. Carl watched the engineer's hands glide over smooth switches and dials illuminated in green light, and he felt a faint ache within his chest. "If we had had machines like this," he muttered. The engineer turned with a grin. "Then maybe you'd have given us real competition. But you were always fighting yesterday's war, buddy." Carl didn't answer. The noise was too loud, but the words echoed in his mind long afterward. At their destination, the prisoners stepped out into another yard, this one filled with brand new army vehicles ready for shipment east. Hundreds of trucks, stacked tires, endless barrels of fuel. Carl felt dizzy from the sight. "Where does it end?" he asked aloud. Alan's voice was low, almost contemplative. It doesn't, because most of what you see here isn't about war. It's about what comes after. That sentence stayed with Carl for the rest of his life. By September, many of the prisoners had adopted a quiet reverence for the system surrounding them. They sang German folk songs in the evenings, but spoke with newfound humility. Some admitted that the war had been doomed not only militarily, but morally. A few even started learning basic English terms: wrench, engine, freedom. Dieter found a discarded magazine that showed photographs of Detroit assembly lines, thousands of women building aircraft fuselages. "Look at this," he said, handing it to Carl. "We thought women were weak, but they built the wings that crushed us." Carl nodded. "Strength is not where we thought it was." Winter approached, and with it, orders came for transfer once more to the southern states. The Americans were redistributing prisoners for agricultural work to assist the harvest. Many of them didn't want to leave. The rail yards, the factories, they had become classrooms, showing them a version of civilization unscarred by ideology. As the trains prepared to depart, smoke curling into the freezing sky, Carl stood one last time on the platform, staring at the factories fading behind him. Something inside him shifted, not surrender, but understanding. A guard's call broke his thoughts. "All aboard! Next stop, Texas." Carl turned to Dieter. "More machines?" Dieter shook his head slowly. "No. Maybe now we'll see what kind of people can build all this." The train groaned into motion, carrying its passengers southward through the endless expanse of a nation that had mastered both war and peace. The seeds of understanding. The air grew warmer with every mile as the train rolled farther south. By the time the prisoners arrived in Texas, the landscape had changed completely. Wide plains beneath endless sky, cotton fields swaying in the heat, the scent of earth thick and dry. The POWs were divided into groups and sent to work on local farms, helping with harvest. The guards were still present, but casual now, leaning on fence posts with rifles slung lazily over their shoulders. The war in Europe was ending, and the Americans knew it. The sense of menace was gone, replaced by quiet routine. Carl Meissner and Dieter worked for a farmer named Will Carter. He was a broad-shouldered man with sun-creased eyes and a voice as slow and heavy as the summer wind. He greeted the Germans with a nod, no hostility, just practical kindness. "You work, you eat, you rest, same as my boys," he said. And that was how it began. Captured soldiers from a fallen Reich, rising every morning before dawn to pick cotton and fix fences on a Texas farm. Carl felt a strange peace settle over him, though he couldn't name it yet. The fields were silent except for crickets, the windmills creak, and the low growl of jeeps driving occasionally by. One day, while helping repair a tractor, Carl lifted an oil-covered wrench and asked Carter, "All this land, how can one man manage so much?" Carter smiled, squinting against the sun. "I don't," he said. "The tractor does. The machines help us, not rule us." He paused, handing Carl a canteen of water. "Freedom works the same way, son. You treat it right, it'll give you everything you need." The sentence lingered in Carl's head long after that. Freedom as a machine, driven not by orders, but by trust. In the evenings, the POWs were allowed to sit near the farmhouse, drinking weak coffee and watching the sunset. Sometimes the Carter family joined them. The farmer's wife brought pie or cornbread. The small children, curious and fearless, asked endless questions. "Did you have trains in Germany? Do you eat sausage for breakfast every day?" The innocents cracked the hard armor of prisoners who had seen the end of civilization. One night, Will Carter brought out a small radio. Music floated into the dark, the soft croon of jazz, foreign and beautiful beyond words. For the Germans, it was the first time they had heard anything that wasn't a military march or propaganda anthem. It was life itself, carried through the air. Carl closed his eyes and thought of home, of his wife, of ruined streets, of a Germany that had built tanks instead of dreams. Later, after months of work, small privileges appeared. Some prisoners wrote letters home through the Red Cross. Carl's arrived in December. His wife's handwriting trembled. "Our house is gone, but I have found work. We begin again." That night, Carl read the letter aloud to Dieter. His voice cracked only once. "She says she's working for an American relief agency now." Dieter looked away, wiping dust from his brow. So even there, America builds. By spring, talk of repatriation spread through the camps. The war was over. Hitler was dead. Germany was ash and rubble. One evening, as the men gathered by the fence to watch the sunset one final time, Sergeant Allen returned to oversee their departure. He handed Carl a small object, a steel lighter engraved with the words "to remember, not to forget." Carl turned it over in his hands. "Why give this to a prisoner?" he asked softly. Allen met his gaze with quiet sincerity. "Because you aren't that anymore. You're just a man who saw what machines can do when they serve life instead of death." When the trucks arrived to take them away, the Carter family stood by the road to wave goodbye. The children shouted their farewells. Carl raised his hand, swallowing an unexpected ache in his throat. They drove away across the plains, past the tractors, the towns, the endless roads that tied the American landscape together like veins of steel. Weeks later, the Atlantic was beneath them again. The same ocean that had carried them west in defeat now carried them east, toward a homeland they no longer recognized. But inside each man, inside Carl, Dieter, and thousands more, something irreversible had changed. Carl gripped the rail of the ship, gazing at the clouds. "They conquered us with factories," he said quietly, "but they saved us with their humanity." Dieter nodded, his voice low. "Perhaps that's the power we never understood, the power to build a world, not destroy it." As the sun dipped into the sea, the Liberty ship moved forward through glittering waters, its engines humming like the pulse of a living nation, a nation whose might had not only reshaped the war, but the very souls of those who had come to fight it. And so the German POWs returned home, not as heroes, not as exiles, but as witnesses to a truth that would echo for generations, that strength is not measured by conquests or banners, but by the ability of a people to create, to build, and to forgive. Their captivity had ended, yet their education in freedom had only just begun.